Shall we sit down here?
Yes.
Will you chair it? Where do you want to sit?
I'll just make a little introduction.
Okay, and then I'll take my stand there.
Yes.
Correct. Cool.
Ladies and gentlemen, first of all, a very warm welcome to this event. We had 18 registrations online, but we have 20 people here, so that's good.
Great.
However, we do have 20,000 viewers, so I hope that this video will get that much reach. Anyway, as we all know, Brexit is a hot topic at the moment, and Ireland is at the centre of this world. I personally think Ireland could take advantage of the situation and truly become the hub of the transatlantic hub for all the flights, first of all, because there's something I want to raise with you later on in terms of flights, could truly become the transatlantic or the center of trade between the Americas, the Asia, and Europe. Right. And I think there's no other person better than who can discuss more about Brexit and give us profound explanation about Brexit than Brian Hayes, who's actually a member of the European Parliament, who is the person who sees all this on a daily basis, who also accompanied Leo Varadkar, our Taoiseach, where he gave his first speech, or he was the first Taoiseach and the first Prime Minister of any country to host a debate with all the other Prime Ministers or members of the European Parliament, which I think is really exciting. It also sets an example that Ireland is the centre of the world. I'll pass it on to Brian, who's going to talk to you in more detail.
Great. Thank you very much. Well, good evening, everyone, and thanks very much for having me along and organising this event. It's great to be here. It's my second event here in the European Parliament office of the day. We had a colleague of ours from the European Parliament, Paul Tang, who was on the radio this morning. You may have heard him talking about corporate taxation. So we had an event here this morning, this afternoon rather, so it's my second time here. So it's particularly great to be here and meeting so many people and talking to people on Facebook as well about the whole question of Brexit. It was Leo Varadkar at the moment in Davos, and where a lot of world leaders are CEOs of major international organizations. And he made comments today that I think are interesting about where we're going to go from now, because I didn't think Brexit would happen. I have to put my hand up and say I got it totally wrong. I didn't believe it would happen. And when I was elected to the European Parliament in 2014, at that stage, in a famous Bloomberg speech that David Cameron gave, he gave a commitment to have this referendum, which was the first time the British had voted on the question of Europe since the early 1970s. When they went into Europe, first, of course, historically, with the Conservatives, Ted Heath and his government, they went in without any referendum. And then there was a commitment given by Howard Wilson, who was the then Labour Prime Minister, who became Labour Prime Minister because of splits in his own party. The Labour Party was split, or the Conservative Party was pro-European at the time. Now it's the opposite. Wilson gave the commitment to have a referendum to reaffirm that decision, and they reaffirmed it by a massive majority, by 2/3 to 1/3. So I didn't believe that we'd get to the point of having a referendum. When David Cameron gave that commitment in the Bloomberg speech, then the game was set for this referendum, which occurred, and we all know the outcome got followed. I think British politics right now is in a profoundly interesting but disruptive place, because when you're trying to negotiate with people on the terms of people leaving this organization called the European Union, and when you're trying to work out exactly the modalities of that, the divorce proceedings, like in any relationship, you have to be clear that the person you're negotiating with, or the country you're negotiating with, is a counterparty that you can actually get a deal with. And I'm not convinced right now, in my kind of first reflection, that British politics and the positions that it's in right now is a reliable partner in terms of what they can deliver, because their political system is so fractured. That's not a criticism of where the country is. It's more an observation of where politics is in the UK right now. It's very hard to see any consensus emerging, despite the fact that a majority of people have voted by an adequate but small majority to leave the European Union. What are they leaving? Are they leaving the customs union and the single market? That's what their government are saying. What do they want to stay in? How is it the case that we are going to have an agreement which will ultimately go through the UK Parliament, because they will vote before we vote in the European Parliament? So my first observation is that in any negotiation, you have to be dealing with people where you're convinced they'll be able to deliver what they want. I'm in Brussels at the moment. It's not exactly clear as to what the British want. Leo spoke today about the potential of doing some Norway Plus deal. Now, Norway are in the EEA, as it's called, like Switzerland. Norway pay in to the EU budget. They abide by virtually all of the regulations that we set. They virtually agree in terms of the freedom of movement. They accept judgments from the ECJ in respect of EU legislation, which is then applied in Norway. That's not a hard Brexit for that to be applied in the British case. It is a soft Brexit. Maybe it's not what people want, I don't know. But it is at the very least a Brexit that is a million miles away from what the members of the Conservative Party and UKIP want in terms of this hard exit. So, going back to my point, trying to understand what people want is going to be challenging. My second point is this, from Ireland. We have now the end of phase one. Phase one negotiation was on the question of the Irish border, EU nationals living in the UK and British citizens living in the EU, and obviously on the question of the amount of money they owe us in leaving the European Union. And of course they owe, because they're committed to certain projects, they're committed to pensions. So we've now agreed a framework how we can look at this question, and I think that will be resolved. Commitments have been given on the Irish border question in terms of alignment and how that could work into the future. Going back to a hard border and all of that, and I genuinely believe the British are committed to that, but how it will work out in practice in terms of single markets, but it doesn't matter. And commitments have been given to the EU citizens living or continuing to arrive in the UK. That's one part of the negotiation. And between March and October of this year, we will get to a decision where we try to sketch out early on what a transition would look like over a 2-year period. In other words, from 2019 to 2021, what that transition would look like. And then beyond then, what are the major headline areas of a potential new trade deal between the UK and Europe? And that's when I don't see a conclusion for at least 7 years. I think you're going to have a 2-year transition and then another 5 years of a negotiation. So the British will be leaving the European Union, assuming we get this deal, in March 2019, voted by the European Parliament, voted, we assume, by the House of Commons. They will be then transitioning to something new, which is yet to be determined. And in the middle of all that is politics, with all its disruptive nature and its personalities, where people are feeling hurt emotionally, where people are feeling hurt financially, if the British economy is in the worst position it is now. So no one knows the outcome of that. This is an enormous geopolitical issue, which if anyone tells you they have a solution to this, they don't. This is going to take a long time to sort out. And we as a country and other EU partners are going to have to live with Brexit for a long time, because it's going to be such an important part of our politics. My third observation is this, that in the middle of all of this disruption, if you like, we thought Trump was bad, but now you've Brexit. In the middle of all of this, Europe has to get back to the day job. And the day job is around doing the ordinary things that ordinary people want. More jobs, better quality jobs, more standards that apply to the single market, getting the single market working, making sure that we have things at our disposal to de-risk some of the things that are going on in the world financial economy. I think it was Mario Draghi who said, people will only ever want to join something or stay in something if they see a benefit of it. And because the last 10 years have been fighting fire because of the financial crisis, so much of what we're trying to do now is around delivering ordinary people kind of things that ordinary people want, roaming charges, stuff like that. Actually, ordinary people understand what is the difference that's been made in the youth initiative.
in terms of unemployment? What's the difference we can do on climate, even though Trump's going one direction? Can we come to an agreement with China? We're very active players in this area who want us to implement the agreement from the COP, Climate Change Conference. So getting back to the J job means doing two things: continuing to sort out the problems in Europe and also sorting out Brexit. And I think Ireland actually, if I can make my fourth observation, I think, and this is a challenging thing to say to an Irish audience, I think for too long we've been the Dr. Knows saying no, no, no to things that don't suit us. Now, there are certain red line issues that genuinely do not suit us. Question of corporate taxation, we can discuss that later. But too often in the past, if the British look for opt-outs on certain things to do with home affairs, we've got a lot of them on it. And I think we have to reopen that. I think we've got to do more in the whole area of security and defence, working with solidarity with the other 26 in trying to deal with the new threats that are there: global terrorism, cyber security, people smuggling, and the whole issue of energy security. The modern security and defence agenda in Europe is not groups of countries with armies getting on the battlefield and killing each other. It is new threats that change constantly, threats to do with the internet. And I think we have a big contribution to make in that, based on our traditional policies. And I think we can shape European defence policy in a way that respects our traditional policies of being non-aligned militarily and non-nuclear, but equally respecting the traditions of humanitarian aid relief and peacekeeping, which is such an important part of what we do internationally as well. That's another area I think we can make a contribution as Irish people. The third area I think we can make a contribution is in the area of the capital markets union. One of the big things in this city, is you will know, some of you maybe in the financial services area, is the huge expertise that we've built up here in Dublin and equally across the country in financial services. Europe needs that expertise. Europe needs our kind of exporting prowess. Europe needs the kind of can-do exporting attitude, because not every country in the European Union is following that example. And I think trying to build a capital markets union, in other words, moving away from this obsession with banks towards trying to get people's pension funds invested in a way which allows bigger return, moving on things like securitization so that we can get capital working towards investment again, which is still down by that 20%. I think that's something we can bring to the party as well, a third area. And the fourth area is in relation to migration. We need to do an awful lot more to help people coming into the European Union to settle into this country. We are still a very homogeneous society. We have seen a fundamental change in a very short period of years. I think we've coped with that somewhat. We can learn an awful lot from other countries, I think, in how we can get things right rather than wrong in terms of integration. But it seems to me when it comes to migration, about 6% of the world's population now in the 28 member states of the European Union. 15 years ago, it was about 10%. Europe's getting older demographically, not so much in Ireland, but in the bigger countries like Germany especially. We have got to take in more people, not just those who are fleeing persecution, say in the Middle East and Syrian example, but also there has to be some kind of green card system to allow people to come as economic migrants to the European Union and to settle and to see a future for themselves in the European Union. And I don't think we've done enough as a country to take our responsibilities in the way that we should in terms of more people. We are still a small population, 4.7 million. The Central Statistics Office tells us by 2035, I think, we will be a population of 5.7 million, exactly if they know all these things correctly, so believe them, they got it right fast. That's great for the country. But one of the great dynamic drivers of any successful, prosperous country is more people living in it. It's good for the gene pool. It's good for entrepreneurship. It's good for domestic economy, more people driving the economy. So we've got to lead by example. And I give the example of Germany and Sweden, who are taking 90% of migrants up till the time of the most recent migration crisis. We need to learn from that example as a country. And my final area, what we can give to, what we can bring to the party, if you like. And I was really happy that the Taoiseach spoke about this last week in his speech in Strasbourg. He said, you know, Ireland has received somewhere between 47 to 50 billion euros since we joined the European Union in net transfers. Big difference is made to our farmers. Big difference is made to third level education institutions. The institutes of technology were all built by European social funding at the time. Big difference is made to our road funding. Horizon 2020, big difference in research. It'll still take from the budget. 70% of all the budget still goes to our farmers in income supplements for us. But we've become, in the last 3 years, net contributors to the budget. We're now putting up more money. And one of the things that Europe has never seen in this light, and I passionately believe it, Europe actually is a form of redistribution, that the wealthier parts of Europe redistribute through the European budget, which is only about 1% of GDP, but it's nonetheless about €1 trillion over a 7-year period. The wealthier parts of Europe redistribute to the peripheral parts of the poorer parts. We're still a peripheral country. We have no direct access to the continent, and we know all of the issues around that. But I believe, and what the Taoiseach said last week is, if Britain are leaving, it leaves 50% hole in the budget. It will be the wrong signal to send out right now to poorer countries in Europe, or indeed to possible accession countries in the future who might join Europe, that we're going to expect to see a smaller budget in the future, because Europe still needs to do things in such a way as to deliver on the kind of things we wanted to do. So it seems to me a courageous thing to say, as the Taoiseach said, that there are circumstances where we would pay more as a wealthy country, given the fact that we've achieved so much and we've obtained so much in direct support and aid. It seems to be the right thing to do. So there's I've just given 5 areas where I think we can do more. I think too often the debate in Ireland is framed as what we can get from Europe. That's important. But there's a wider debate. What we can give to Europe. And I think by giving more, politically, economically, capital markets, all of these things on the defence side, by giving more, Irish people's footprint is actually bigger in the world. I don't believe that it's country against country. I don't believe in petty nationalism. Post-nationalism is probably my best description of myself. And that I think you obtain things for people, you achieve things by pooling sovereignty, working in big multinational organizations. The European Union is more than just a big multinational, complicated organization. It's actually something that one of the few things people feel, a sense of being Irish and European, a sense of being French and European, a sense of being German and European. That is, as the Taoiseach said in his speech, I think in Strasbourg, this idea of a common European home. I think it's quite an appealing idea, actually, this idea that, you know, often I go into a classroom and I speak to kids, and, you know, you see Bunrock Maher and our Constitution possibly up on the wall, and you see the whole question of European fundamental rights, you know, treaty obligations and rights, and you sort of say, well, you're very lucky, you guys, you might be 7 or 8 or 9 or 11 or 12, whatever age the kids are. You have 2 sets of rights. You have rights as an Irish citizen, but you also have European rights. And I don't think this generation can take any of that for granted. I think we have to fight for the application of those rights, not just in the European Union, but the values that they mean, and say difficult things to our friends in America. America is going in the wrong direction. Say difficult things to our friends in the Middle East is going in the wrong direction, and in Africa and elsewhere. Because I think Europe can be an absolute beacon for the kind of values that we have in Europe. I think our universal values around democracy, freedom, respect for difference, tolerance, political system that underpins representational democracy, separation of powers, independent judiciary, these things that we take for granted, but are new concepts. When you go to a place like Portugal and Spain, countries that previously were controlled by dictators, by the army generals, these countries are democracies only 30, 35 years. And you see the transition in countries like Bulgaria, Hungary, not the best examples given the direction of some of their governments right now. But the countries that have lived under the yoke of communism for so long, we take for granted the freedoms that we have. And Europe, despite all its problems, despite all its difficulties,
still represents 15 of the 25 most peaceful countries in the world are in Europe. The lowest rate of incarceration of any region of the world is in Europe. Even though there is some fundamental inequality in Europe, Europe is still, by comparison to other regions of the world, one of the most equal places in the world. We represent about 6 or 7% of the world's population, 20% of the world's wealth, and 50% of all social spending in the world is in Europe. So when you add up all the amounts we give on health, justice, and education, it's about 50% of all the social spending in the world is in 28 member states of the European Union. It's quite extraordinary. But equally, them numbers don't add up, because long term, 90% of the growth this year is not in the European Union, it's out of the European Union. So we've got to catch up with other parts of the world that are actually they've gained hugely vis-a-vis Europe in recent years. So there's a big agenda around how we do that as an economy, how we become more competitive, how we actually put research and innovation at the heart of what we want to do. Hold Europe, where people went to university and came out of it at 24 and retired at 60 and lived in the Canaries for 20 years thereafter. Old Europe that is not possible really into the future. So we've got to define new benefits and rights for people against an economic reality of what we face. So I think we can be an absolute bridge in all of that as a country that hasn't so much taken the benefits and is ignoring Europe, rather a country that has done so much with the opportunities that it was given. And that's the difference that EU spending can make in countries where that spending leads to a better outcome economically, a more competitive economy, rather than to bad political outcomes. That's the opportunities that we have. So we face a lot of challenges with Brexit. We face a very uncertain future. If the British economy dips significantly, we take a part of that dip. It's just the nature of the business. It's the nature of the economy. But I'd like to say that I think so much of what we want to do into the future is around contributing more as Irish people. And I think our reputation is strong. I think our footprint is strong in Europe. I think we can achieve so much as a small country of less than 5 million people by staying at the heart of the European decision making and carving out a future for ourselves with others and creating new alliances from smaller member states as a kind of a bulwark to the bigger member states as a means of achieving our objectives. So thank you very much. So,
do you want to take a seat?
Yes. You step aside. You're very alone here.
First of all, thank you for such a great explanation. And how people play an important role in the European Union. I'll start first. Right?
Good.
My very first question is the one thing that we're campaigning for right now. The entire Indian community wants it, and there is a direct flight from Ireland to India. We have a growing population, so at the moment we stand at 35,000, which is constantly growing. We have a lot of Indian students coming to Ireland. At the moment we have 5,000 students residing in Ireland. That number is again constantly growing. I work with Education Ireland very closely, so I know that they're doing fairs twice to 3 times a year now. Indian businesses are investing in Ireland, and after the UK leaving the European Union, Ireland is the only English-speaking country left.
Yes.
On that grounds, Ireland will be the main point of contact for India, because again, India being the largest English-speaking country, and Ireland in the European Union, and India has the largest middle-class income earners as well. Now, how can Ireland be the transatlantic hub for these flights?
Well, I'd like to see those flights happen, but it's only going to be provided with the privates. The airplanes and the airlines will have to do it, and they'll do it if they see money to be made in it. It's not going to be the state who can do it. And what the state can do, I think, is provide the opportunities for it to happen. I'm speaking tomorrow in Fingal, which is where the airport is located.
Right, yeah.
You know, 20% of the wealth of Fingal County is determined through the airport. It's an extraordinary statistic. You know, a fifth of the total income and wealth of Fingal, a small part of the country, is in and around and surrounding the airport. So the airport is a great asset for Ireland, and it's extraordinary. The numbers in the last year up by about 6%.
Yeah.
Since Aer Lingus, actually, since we got rid of 25% share of Aer Lingus, AIG, isn't it? They partnered with. We've had more international destinations coming. So it's an example of how you can transform a previously state-owned company for the purposes of getting bigger players into your country. So there's no reason why we can't have flights to India.
As a matter of fact, Dublin and Shannon airports are the other two airports in the entire European Union that have US pre-clearance. I've actually tried. I've been in touch with the DFA. I've been in touch with some governments for foreign affairs and trade.
But it's not. I mean, let's be frank.
Right.
It's not the job of politicians to provide airlines. If there's money to be made, they'll provide it.
Okay.
I don't believe in any state whereby the state's job is not to. The state should facilitate it and do whatever it can and encourage negotiation and all the rest of it. But it's the state's job is not to provide airline seats to people. I'll be very honest about that. Its job is to facilitate and see is it possible as part of a trade round, part of a discussion. And I mean, that's one thing I can certainly take up with the government. I'm sure they're conscious of it. But I would have thought, given the number of Indian people in the country, 35,000, you were saying, we should at least be able to achieve at least one flight a week. I mean, I don't know why we can't achieve that. So all it takes is...
like Air India flies from New Delhi to London 3 times a day.
Yeah.
I have to fly once a week to Dublin.
Moreover, just to add on the same lines, like there is untapped market for the parents also. There are lots of youngsters here who are studying, who have recently started working. Their parents are not planning their travels just because they might or might not be speaking fluent English. And if they have a connecting flight, sometimes they feel that, okay, how we will change and go. If we have a direct flight, the number of passengers could also increase in time.
Yes, absolutely. So it needs to happen, but it'll be the private sector who'll provide it. And I think what the government needs to do is just continually push it. That's something I can talk.
Just on the government and because there are direct flights nowadays from India to San Francisco. That's like one of the longest flights in the world.
Yeah.
And that was done when the Prime Minister visited US, and like the Indian community there urged them to start it.
Yes.
And also the governments of both the countries talked about it. So that's one of the...
But listen, I think it's a matter for the government to deal with our counterparties in India about this and put it on the agenda, given the huge Indian community in Ireland right now, and the future. I mean, I know the emerging middle class in India. It's an extraordinary success story. We should take. I mean, there are real connections between India and the EU, and because of the size of Indian democracy, actually, there's many historical connections between Ireland. Bloc and our own constitution at the time of the establishment of the Indian state, they looked, I know, to what we had achieved in Ireland in terms not just of our own constitutional establishment, but also how, at the time, the Statutes of Westminster, because it's something that defined in the 1930s the kind of new Commonwealth relationship. Actually, it was Gareth Fitzgerald's father, Desmond Fitzgerald, who negotiated the Statute of Westminster in 1932, and that became a focal point for Indian democracy and Indian independence at the time. And it's rarely recognised the role played by those very young Irish leaders at the time in that kind of post-independence period. It became the new benchmark for the Commonwealth relationship into the future. And we need to talk about those things because they're rich in a kind of constitutional setting, a democratic session between Ireland and India. So we have so much in common, not just on the language front and the Indian obsession with technology and the Irish obsession with technology. Not just that, but especially so, and the democratic roots, but especially so because of the whole British thing.
Yeah.
And that is something that I think, is something to be celebrated rather than to be seeing a bunch of difference.
On Brexit, so Britain has got a huge amount to pay. Firstly, do you
know the amount?
No,
I guess the amount.
Yeah, I think there was an amount that came up, but do you think that you're going to pay that huge amount. I know it was like a huge hurdle just to get to that amount, and it's a lot of money. And I'm in the financial interest with the whole method thing happening. But one of the things that, and I know you're speaking at the PIBA conference a couple of weeks, so
That's right.
yeah, which is great. So, and but yeah, but just to also ask, you say 1% is in the budget, and
It's 1% of
the GDP.
European GDP. Yeah.
Yes,
It's just short of €1 trillion over a 7-year budget we face. Yeah.
Yeah. So Ireland is being told you have to tax Apple. 13, and it's something to the region of 13 billion.
Plus change.
Yeah, plus change. How much of that is Europe looking to get of that? Because they're pushing us to tax them and all this stuff, but how much of that? Because that will matter, I think, to Ireland to know, okay, how much of that?
Well, I'll be talking about this later on the radio program tonight, 10 o'clock. You can tune in and listen then if you're bothered, if you really want to go to sleep. But the Apple tax case is a big issue for Ireland. It's caused us a lot of reputational trouble. And it goes back to a tax practice that was allowed at the time, whether it was nice or not nice, or whether it was legal. And we've changed subsequently that provision in our tax code. And the bit that Europe, I don't think, understands is that this amount of 13 billion is not our money. Apple pay every bit of what of the economic activity they generate in Ireland, they pay it in Ireland, right? The 13 billion figure results from profits in other countries. So the Irish state argues we're not responsible for taking tax or collecting tax for other member states. That's an issue between them and Apple, or indeed their host country, the United States. It's not an issue for us. You saw recently how Apple were able, I think, pay was 35 billion or something to the US taxman because they reduced from 35% corporate tax in the United States. So we're not responsible. That's the position of the Irish government. We're not responsible for being the international tax collector for the world. So this case is going for the European courts. It will be decided. Ireland will abide by the result, and we'll see the outcome. But the important point is to make is that the issues that arose to that first ruling, which were really on residency terms more than anything else, have all been resolved. Michael Noonan brought the double Irish agreement to an end, and we've changed the residency rules. We're adopting all of the chapters in the OECD agenda, and they are quite onerous, and rightly so. And I suppose the argument that small countries like Ireland make with small domestic populations says that it's important that corporate tax comes in Ireland because it's a much bigger proportion of our overall tax take than is the case in larger countries with larger domestic populations. So Europe are pushing us on this issue, but it's still a sovereign issue, and it can only happen as a consequence of unanimity and agreement. So it's a big issue in Ireland because our tax base in the terms of the corporation side is so important. It's a much bigger proportion of what we take in on tax, and that's something that we'll have to monitor. But what I'm saying is, if these red line issues that are very important for Ireland, we can continue to hold those positions. But I think there's a bigger responsibility for us to do more in other areas, and I think that's a part of the agenda that we need to face right now. Notwithstanding the fact that we need to get more money from all these corporations, full stop. But the good news is that corporation profit tax in Ireland has doubled in the last 5 years, from 4 billion to 8.5 billion. Them's the figures. And so this idea that there's a low tax economy, the corporates, actually, for every man, woman and child, we take €1,500 in corporate tax. In France, it's 700. So no one's stopping them taxing more if they want. Their concern is that they're not getting a share of our tax, on the basis that a lot of economic activity in other member states is generated by these multinationals. But I argue that's a matter for them. I mean, it's not a full federation. The European Union is a hugely complex multinational organization. It is not a federation. It's not the United States of Europe. Some would like it, but it's not. And then you're always going to have sovereignty and taxation together. So I think we will wait and see the outcome of this. But I mean, the OECD agenda is the important agenda because, Europe needs to take a lead, but it can't take such a lead as to drive investment from Ireland, say India. I mean, that would be a kamikaze position to take. Yes.
Yeah, like the OECD has put a white paper on collaborative corporate tax. And if we see from Ireland's perspective, one of our major reason or a major reason to get most of the FDI here in Ireland is less corporation taxes. But if we go in that route, like collaborative corporation taxes, then it could streamline the same amount of taxes everywhere. So how challenging do you see for Ireland as in us to attract big corporates to come here?
Well, I don't believe that the big corporates coming to Ireland are here exclusively because of our tax rate.
Mm-hmm.
I think they're here for a number of reasons. English language is one. Yes, we have a competitive tax rate, but it's not the lowest in the European Union. Actually, there's two countries with a lower rate. So Taoiseach said this last week, this argument is a race to the bottom. That's a race that we're never going to win because we have a higher rate of tax than other countries in the European Union. So I don't buy that argument. I think people come to our country because of the flexibility of our workforce. We have a very good education system. We're a bridge to the European Union. I think they're especially going to come down to Britain or leaving the European Union. There's no certainty in their political system, but as to their future relationship. And I think for US businesses especially, it's easier to come to Ireland because of the historical connections. So,
great infrastructure. Pardon? A great infrastructure?
Well, yeah. Yeah, it's all that stuff is good. I think certainty is very important in international affairs. So the fact that there's an agreement that this 12.5% rate remains, no matter who's in government, even at bad times it remains, gives certainty. That's not to say, of course, that the state has had to, because of the crisis, a decade or so ago, broaden the tax base and do other things with tax. We've increased all the taxes on capital, of course, capital gains tax, capital acquisition tax, property taxes, pension tax, all that stuff has had to. But I think the consistency of message on the 12.5% has been very strong, I think, in attracting businesses because they know Ireland's position. And I keep saying to my colleagues, when people think there's just letterboxes all over Dublin, no activity, it's kind of crazy. Apple employs 6,000 people in Cork. These are real people. These are not kind of robots. These are real people who live in real communities, pay real mortgages, have real children, live in real communities. These are, and some colleagues don't want to hear this. I think there is an understandable view in parts of Europe that we want to get some of these multinationals taxed to our own country because we're buying so much of their product. And moving away from how you're going to source the form of taxation. But that's an issue for them to sort out. We have our tax system. I don't believe it's going to be any more efficient by moving to some kind of hybrid corporate CCCTB system, which only affects actually anyone on turnovers over 75 billion actually. So you're effectively going to have two taxation systems running parallel, all the confusion that goes with that. Some of the stuff actually cuts across what the OECD is trying to do. And I don't think Europe should undermine the OECD in trying to create a level playing pitch where none previously was there. We do have a responsibility to get rid of aggressive tax planning. Europe's done an awful lot in this area. Automatic tax exchange, AMLD4, the anti-money laundering issue. We've done a lot in that area. But I believe tax is a sovereign national issue. And I'm not ideologically against tax competition. I think tax competition very much fits into what you have. We didn't have an industrial revolution in Ireland. There was no heavy industry in Ireland. We had to do things differently. We didn't have colonies. Some of these other countries in Europe had massive colonies in Africa. Had massive. I live a lot of my life in Belgium, and it's fantastic buildings, great historical wealth. They had Congo. So we didn't have that. I mean, there's a whole fundamental hypocrisy in this whole debate. It's not really about corporate tax justice. It's about taking some of our tax.
In terms of
go ahead.
Thanks. Have you had any inkling, or do you think there's any circumstances in which Britain was to turn around and not leave the EU?
And just what I'm reading in the papers and speaking to British MEPs, I mean, there's half of them want to remain. Even the majority of Tory MEPs want to remain. I don't see how they can, though.
The second referendum?
Yeah, I don't see it. I mean, I personally don't see it in this generation. I think in maybe 10 or 15 years, they could look at it again, but it's pretty historic, the decision. And I don't know how they get out of that. I think the more likely outcome is a kind of half in, half out. Yeah. As Leo said, so the teacher said today, this thing about the Norway Plus. I think that's more possible actually in the long run. But I just don't know how they get out of this decision. So I don't buy the argument about a second referendum. I think it's more likely that when it gets to the vote in the House of Commons post-December next year, between December and March, when we have to vote in the European Parliament, what I think is more likely is that the House of Commons could reject the deal from both the Leavers and the Remainers. The Remainers saying it's not good enough, the Leavers saying it's not Brexit enough, and the thing collapsing. And at that point, the whole thing is either mothballed, or we would never vote, and there would be a cliff edge, which is a really dramatic event for that to happen in terms of financial stability. There'd be no transition, there'd be no nothing if they turn it down. And the only options at that stage would be the cliff edge with the complete WTO rules, and they're out, no agreement, which is the worst case for us. The alternative would be under Article 50, you can extend the negotiations. I'm not sure it's 1 year. I think the council can come to a different view on it, but that requires unanimity. So all it takes is one member state, say Cyprus, Ireland, say no, we disagree with that, and the thing. So it's problematic. So I hope a deal can be done.
In terms of like a hard Brexit, right? How much prepared Ireland is? Like, for example, there are bigger projects coming in, like the integrated single electricity market, and Ireland is completely dependent on UK to provide as a bridge to connect to Europe.
Yeah, with the connectors, yeah. So, although we're looking at a connector between France and Ireland as well. So, as you know, that's in the mix of consideration by both the French and Irish governments. Energy is really problematic because we have effectively a single energy market at the moment with connectors between everywhere, which helps the peripheral regions have adequacy of energy. And that's a big issue actually for businesses coming to Ireland, the adequacy of water, energy, all of the things that it requires to do its work. So we're going to have to come to some, bespoke UK-Ireland solution, because Northern Ireland, of course, there's a constant interchange between Northern Ireland and the Republic and between East and West as well. So we have to come to an agreement. It hasn't been sorted yet. And how that agreement can be recognised if the British are leaving and they're not part of this, a single energy market is a big question.
Yes. So, to the best of my understanding, the deal we did on regulatory alignment and the non-existent border, or seamless border between North and South, and following on from that, David Davis said that there will be no differences in regulations between Northern Ireland and the rest of the UK, suggests that the entirety of the UK will have to remain within the customs union. Or, in theory, the UK could internally decide to have some kind of divide between Northern Ireland and then the rest of the UK. But I don't really, it's possible, but I'm not sure I buy it. Do you honestly believe that the UK as a whole will remain within the customs union? Because that's the only conclusion I can draw if the statements that have been said up till now will prove to actually be true.
I don't know is the answer to that question. No one knows. But historically, and something I only learned in the course of this debate, that two things, that directives that come from the European Union following the agreement by Council and Parliament and co-decision making, the application of those directives when they're transposed, the British have had a kind of unique way of transposing those, in that the Scottish Parliament has transposed some of them, the Welsh Assembly some of them, and in Northern Ireland, when we had an executive and a Parliament in Stormont, hopefully we'll have it again soon, they also transpose. So even though you're dealing with one state, the way in which the transposition occurred was quite different one country to the next. And then, of course, we had in the Irish case specific areas of executive control and power under the Good Friday Agreement, and before that again, of cross-border bodies which have executive function because they relate back to Stormont and Dáil in 8 specific areas. So the argument is that into the future, for bus drivers who run a bus route between Belfast and Dublin, one in the European Union, one not, you could apply a singular regulatory alignment with Europe on the basis that that was a devolved issue anyway, and it was equally an issue that neatly fitted into the cross-community, cross-border arrangements of the Good Friday Agreement. So that's a very bespoke settlement. But I mean, you're right. If the alignment exists across the UK as a whole, it does suggest that they're going to be in some form of customs union. They may not call it that. Politicians have a tendency of language of being pragmatic at the end of the day. So there might be a customs union, but it might look exactly the same as a customs union.
But then will they have to reach accommodations on the other freedoms?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
It seems to me that that accommodation would have to be reached on contribution, decision-making, arbitration, ECJ, whatever about the fundamental freedoms of travel, rights of travel.
Brian, thank you very much for your Brexit talk. And I have a question on immigration. On immigration, because of Brexit thing, a lot of immigrants in the UK, they are moving out to European Union, especially to Ireland, because it is English-speaking country. My first question is there any policy at European Union level which can which is accommodating these immigrants who are moving out illegally? And is there any policy in relation to the integration of the immigrants who are moving out legally?
Out to where?
To various countries in European Union, because UK is moving out. So
yeah, but I think the agreement will be for EU citizens living in the, they won't involve Irish people because we have common travel, which predates our membership of the European Union. But for EU citizens living in the UK, the British have given very firm commitments as part of Phase 1 about the rights of those people and their families moving and remaining in Britain. Obviously, in the future, they will replace it with some, system of green card, whatever it is. But it's very clear as to the rights of EU citizens living in the UK, and of course, British citizens living in the other 26, their rights. So I think that would be very clear. As to general policy now with migration, I mean, we do a lot of work in that whole area. What's good, what's not so good, how is integration working? The Commission want to move into that space. However, the corpus of law in this area is not strong because states jealously guard their own patterns of migration for non-EU citizens coming and going out of the country. So more recently in Ireland, where the British can conclude negotiations with third countries, we have then managed to work with them in saying that if you can come to London, you can equally come to Dublin for a business trip or a holiday, whatever, and then even to work for a short period of time. And I still think we will need that anyway because of the proximity of the UK market and the way in which Heathrow and Gatwick and all these places are still big hubs, notwithstanding our own ambition to create a big hub in Dublin. So I don't think the EU will be all that involved in that area. But there's no doubt that the EU does fund integration projects, which I think have made some difference when it comes to looking at best practice. Wait and see what other things come down. Yes.
Coincidentally, it comes, I think, along the immigration as well. Before Brexit, Ireland had been probably most of its immigration policies very much aligned to the UK. Now that Brexit is in the office, Do you see Ireland taking a more European approach to immigration?
It's a really good question. It's a really good question because take the Schengen Area Agreement, which we're not party to. And there's a question whether we ever could be party to it on the basis that we have a common area of travel between Ireland and the UK. But the Schengen area is significant benefits to people in travelling across the European Union where the Schengen area exists in terms of the free movement. I think it's very difficult for us to sign up to that, however, as long as we have this very unique common travel area, which is really it's very, very important for Irish people and for British people to have this common travel area between both our countries. And as long as we have that, it's hard to see us moving to that full European model, quite frankly. Now, that's not to say that we can really make a difference when it comes to people coming into our country, either trying to work or obtain asylum, or people who are trying to have their own situation regularized. We could do an awful lot more there. One of the things I'm most proud of, actually, and down Alan Shatter actually at the time in terms of moving on the whole citizenship process, he put a major dent in it and reduced the length of time involved for people waiting around to get their citizenship obtained by the procedural changes he made. Previously people had to go to court directly one-on-one. Now it's going to be done in very large areas. I've met some of those ceremonies. They're fantastic. So I think in that respect there are things we can do in our own state. But it seems to me that the high benchmark of absolute freedom of movement, which is really around the Schengen area, we will find it difficult to be part of that if we continue to have a common travel area with the UK. And I think that is just a practical problem that we will face. And the common travel area is something, it's not just travel. There are reciprocal rights on all sides, in terms of social welfare contracts, pension entitlements. If you work in the UK, recognise, there is a whole range of benefits attached to common travel, which I think we'd be slow to give up, having fought so hard to keep them as part of the Brexit negotiation.
I think we'll take one last question. We'll close.
Yeah, so my question is for this common travel area. Just before Christmas, we can confirm that common travel area with Ireland will still be respected. Although it started with Brexit talks when people had questions about it, like what will happen to our common travel area and reciprocal rights. So do you see, irrespective of the direction Brexit goes in, this could get impacted in any way?
No,
can we feel rest assured that?
I think that in fairness to the British and the Irish on this, despite our differences on things, there's a common political priority on this issue. Yeah. It's very important for them as well, and of course for us as well.
Yeah.
And I don't see any political, in fairness to the British government on this, whatever our differences on things, I don't see any appetite to reopen this. And, colleagues in Brussels say to me, what can we do to help? They understand the uniqueness of the islands, the Northern Ireland issue, East-West issues. And Europe takes a great pride, actually, in peace funding and the fact that this was one of, a territorial dispute within the European Union, which European values helped to resolve in terms, of the overarching support given to Northern Ireland and the island of Ireland in coming over the conflict situation. So they would recognise that were this problem to emerge, it would be a real problem for Irish and English and Welsh and Scottish and everyone. So unless I'm reading it wrong, I don't think there's any, political dividend in anyone causing trouble on this issue.
Okay, thank you.
I hope I'm right.
Yeah, right. Okay. Thank you, Mr. Hayes, for answering all these questions and giving us an insight on Brexit. And so, to conclude, we all know that Ireland is now going to the centre of the European Union.
Well, I might agree with that.
And the UK believes it's going to be a massive gap that I think Ireland will fulfill. And as the younger generation, the upcoming leaders of this country, we have a big role to play in the future. We have a massive responsibility coming towards us. And yeah, so what I'm trying to say is that get up. Thank you, Brian. Thank you so much. Thank you all for your time. I hope you all learned something from this talk. I would like to thank YPPI. We're also hosting an Engage conference on the 29th of March, at Dublin Castle, to which you're all welcome. Also, there's a flag hoisting ceremony tomorrow at India House to commemorate our 69 years of the Constitution.
What time is that?
It's tomorrow at 9:30.
In the morning?
Yes. It's too early.
No, just for other appointments. Sorry.
But if you're available, do come to it.
Yeah.
At India House, not say about Dublin 18. There will be food, so that's always something that attracts people. Right. This was our third talk. Our next talk is going to be with the Ambassador of India. I don't know exactly when, but it's going to be on. I'll try not to talk about it right there. But yeah, it's going to be on the work that we're doing and the work, the contribution we make to the research. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much. You're coming to the conference. City West. Yeah, I'm going to talk about your pen. Yeah. And European pension.
Sorry, guys.
Yeah. We're going to do a picture.
Photograph, please.
Yeah. So we're going to do a picture. Yeah. Everyone gather in. And some of you can stand in the chairs.
Hey.
Don't break your leg.